So we have one last speaker today, and then we have a training, and then we can get out of here and do whatever it is that you all want to do after this. So our last speaker is Dave Shestokas. Dave Shestokas is the author of Constitutional Soundbites and the host of Constitutionally Speaking. He earned his BA in Political Science from Bradley University and his JD from the John Marshall Law School, cum laude, while serving on the John Marshall Law Review. He studied law at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland as well. He's admitted to practice law before the Illinois Supreme Court, the United States District Court for Northern District of Illinois, the Supreme Court of Florida, and the United States District Court of the Middle District of Florida. He's recently completed work with Dr. Betra Isabel Arias on the Spanish language translation of Constitutional Soundbites, which is pretty cool. This work represents in format the modern media consumers prefer, a long tradition of informing citizens about the country's founding documents in their native language. Everyone understands important ideas best in their native language, and it recognizes the growing importance of making available crucial aspects of America's founding and founding heritage to this growing population. So give a warm welcome to Dave Shestokas. Did I do it right? Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, this right here. Okay. So, I'll just put this down right there.
I'll just put this down right here somewhere. Good afternoon. Oh, come on. Good afternoon. Yes, that's much better. I understand that apparently I'm the last, and I'm hoping for the advantages of primacy recency, in which case, of course, you remember the things that you heard first best and the things that you heard last best. So I'm going to try and make it so that the thing that you hear last best is something that you best remember. I usually talk about one of two things. One is, generally speaking, how to talk about the Constitution, generally, or the founding documents of the United States. Or the other talk is, generally speaking, about the need for communicating the ideas of the Constitution in Spanish. This is a special group with special opportunities and special connections, in which case I'm going to try and blend those two together and talk about both the need for this information in Spanish and some ways to talk about the Constitution to begin with. Thanks, and I really want to thank Turning Point for the opportunity to be here to address you guys today. The goal of my writing and website and books, generally speaking, is much like Turning Point, to give people a path to understand ideas that they might not otherwise understand, and then give others the ability to explain first principles of America. We are trying to provide a grounding in these first principles, and the style in those two books is, generally speaking, more akin to blog posts and tweets, because unfortunately most people these days aren't going to read the Federalist Papers. I don't know who's read the Federalist Papers in this group. You guys are really unusual, obviously. In terms of the fact that that's who you do. But generally speaking, the 21st century attention span is not something that does that. And now this is the first click I'm going to do. Okay, somebody tell me where to click, where to aim. All right. I think I got this now. The goal of what I try to do is much like what Thomas Jefferson indicated his goal with the Declaration of Independence was simply to explain the common sense of the matter. And what I want to try and do with this is create common ground by sharing our common heritage. One of the problems of getting to the common sense of the matter is, in fact, we got to do a couple of things. We got to translate 18th century English first to 21st century English, and then from 21st century English for the work that we're doing in the Spanish realm is to translate that into 21st century Spanish. And it's really, really important, I think, because there's 36 million Americans for whom this information has not been made available in the language that they understand best. And in fact, the same goes for 400 million Spanish speakers around the world that have not been have not had this information available to them. I went backwards. Okay. We have, there's three types of translation issues in understanding these documents. The linguistics of English to Spanish, and the fact that language changes over time. And we don't always necessarily understand what people meant when they said things 200 years ago. I was a prosecutor. I was involved in criminal prosecutions or criminal defense work for about 30 years. And a good portion of that time, I had occasion to have either defendants or victims that spoke Spanish. And to facilitate my work, I learned some Spanish. I also studied, I don't know who has roots there, but I studied some in Costa Rica. Okay, and I also studied some in Cuba. And, but that didn't make my Spanish very, very good. So I'm going to just try something. Hola. Okay. Me llamo David Shestokas y soy abogado. ¿Abogado? No? Okay. Pero sei palabras solamente importante para mí. Por ejemplo, culpable, no culpable. You know? 6 meses en cárcel. You know? So that's, you know, my Spanish isn't very, very good. But anybody understand what I said? What did I say? Yeah, okay, lo siento, mi español es malo. But, of course, in everyday language, you know, you guys probably understood what I was getting to. But in everyday language, it's one thing to understand what somebody's getting to, but it's not necessarily all that critical and important. But when it comes to important ideas, important things like first principles of America, it is important to get the words exactly right. How many here consider themselves bilingual? Who grew up in a home where Spanish was the prime language? And how many of you have family where Spanish remains their primary language? Just about everybody. Anybody ever read in Spanish the Declaration of Independence? The Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights. Yeah, there's really significantly different meanings in the way most of the Spanish translations present these documents and the way the 18th century guys that wrote them meant them. Oh, that's not me. Okay, there we go. So the meaning of things in somebody's native language is really, really important. About 120 years ago or so, there was a lot of unrest in a little country in Eastern Europe called Lithuania. There was a young man and a young woman that lived there. They didn't know each other, but they both, for different reasons, wound up coming to America. The young girl was 15 years old. She was one of 11 children, 8 of whom ultimately were killed by the communists. The young man was about to be drafted into the Russian army and understood that Lithuanian conscripts were treated very, very poorly by the Russian army, in which case he, like thousands of others, left Lithuania for the hope and safety of America. They both found their way to Chicago, where they met each other, fell in love, had a son. Now, the Lithuanian community at that time was pretty well self-contained, and you could get along in America with really only being able to speak Lithuania. The Lithuanians had their own newspaper, Draugas, which still 115 years later is still published today in the Lithuanian community in Chicago. But they had a son. The son went to school, and the son learned to speak English, started reading the Chicago Tribune to his folks, first translating that into Lithuanian, and then eventually translating it into English, and then eventually he wound up telling them more about their adopted home. And his duty, unknowingly to him, came to be the bridge between the culture they left and the culture that they came to. Does it sound familiar? Anybody have anybody in their family who left some sort of oppressive regime to come to America? Pretty much everybody, one way or another. There's somebody who has that in their family. And I'd like to tell you that those, of course, were my grandparents, and their story isn't really a Lithuanian story. And the stories of the folks that are in your family aren't really Latino stories. What they really are American stories. And I think that's something that people, all of us, need to think about and remember that we have that kind of common heritage. Somebody in your family is like that. Now, most of you, of course, are in that situation that ultimately my dad was in terms of being a bridge between the culture those folks came from and the culture that you live in now. And I think you have a special obligation as a result of that. Something happened the very first day that the Constitution was written. September 17, 1787, they finished the Constitution. They wanted to send it out to the states for ratification, and in many places they send it out. They had to take time and send it out to all the various states around the country. But what we now know as Independence Hall at that time was also the capital of Pennsylvania, and was where the Pennsylvania legislature met as well as the Constitutional Convention. So for Pennsylvania, all they had to do was walk the Constitution upstairs. The very first day, the Pennsylvania legislature ordered 4,500 copies of the Constitution to be printed. The interesting thing is that only 3,000 of those copies were printed in English. 1,500 of those copies were printed in German. The fact is that on the very first day, the people that sometimes folks refer to as the rich old white guys who didn't care about anybody else, did what was necessary to include and explain in the native language of fully 1/3 of the people of Pennsylvania. The inclusion process that we are continuing to have today was started by those guys that frequently get dismissed in other ways. It's also important to note that I imagine for those of you who remember, before it was New York, it was New Amsterdam. And the same thing that happened in Pennsylvania happened in New York, where they published copies of the Constitution, not just in English for circulation, but also in Dutch. This happens to be a copy of the Dutch Constitution that was printed in 1787. And so they worked to include people on the basis of language started back in 1787 on the very first day of that the Constitution was put together for people to ratify. Which brings me to Capsulus Informativus Constitutionalis, which is our work to bring this information about the Constitution to the Spanish-speaking community. Back in about a year and a half ago or so, I said, I have some Spanish skills, but they're not the best in the world. And I had my friend, Dr. Arias, Dr. Berta Arias, who I had gone to Cuba with, herself a Cuban immigrant. And I called her up and said, can you find something in Spanish that explains the founding documents of the United States of America? She's the past president of the Illinois Latino Council on Higher Education, and she called me back in a couple days, did some research, and said there wasn't anything that existed. There truly wasn't anything that existed. So we set about for the next year to create the very first book that explains in Spanish the first principles of the United States of America. And that had never been done before, and so this was some work that we went to. During the course of this, it was a fairly large project, and it wasn't just Dr. Arias and I. And we're lucky to be joined today by another of the collaborators on the project, Dr. Heather Downey, who's sitting in the back here. Dr. Downey is a PhD in Spanish literature, and so we wanted to make sure that we got the Spanish just right. And we had Dr. Downey's help with us. We're lucky to have her here. She did this. She lives here in Orlando. So, and one of the reasons that got started was not only was I had asked Dr. Arias if anything existed. I said I had just read, or tried to read, based on my Spanish, a Wikipedia article called Padres Fundadores. And Padres Fundadores started out in the second sentence with this. Somebody, my Spanish is bad. Somebody read that for me? Go ahead. And what does it say? Exactly, exactly. And this was the kind of information that is out there. And actually, I can read it, except I have real trouble when I get to 1787. My problem turns out to be at 1787, but this turns out to be the kind of thing, the kind of information that's out there in Spanish. And if you think about it, if somebody gets to the second sentence of this, when it says the Constitution of the United States of America sanctioned the system of slavery, which is really, really inaccurate. If you were to, slavery, there's all kinds of books and seminars and different discussions to be had about that. But in the essence, the Constitution was, as Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist slave, former slave, put it, the Constitution was an anti-slavery document. This is the kind of misinformation that's available in Spanish about the United States of America. And that's something that Dr. Arias and Dr. Downey and I went about to correct. So we spent some time to do this correct, not only to get the English right, but to get the Spanish right. And you know, when some people talk about a living constitution that kind of evolves and people talk, if you think about it for a moment, if you don't work and you don't pay attention to the intent of the people that drafted a law, any law, and the Constitution is law, and it's something that's malleable and something that people can change over time just by changing how they read it or how they interpret the words, then there's no law at all. And we become not a nation of laws, but a nation of lawlessness. And so it was important not just to get the English right, but to get the Spanish right as well. Because I hear so many people from time to time when they disagree with somebody about their opinion about on a particular matter, and they go, it's not who we are as a people. The fact is the principles outlined in the Declaration of Independence and executed by the Constitution are in fact who we should be as a people. We often say, in a kind of a theme about the book, is that the principles aren't Democrat or Republican, they're not liberal, they're not conservative, but they're American. And I was sharing this and sharing the story about the background with some, about the development of Capsulas Informativas Constitucionales at a presentation in Ave Maria University last September 17th. What's September 17th? Constitution Day, exactly. And we passed out, the work was in progress at the time, we passed out some samples of the work, and one Latina student came and spoke with me afterwards and said, you know, this is really, really important. She said, because my Dad is really, really interested in this information, but my Spanish isn't good enough to explain it to him, and his English isn't good enough to read the original documents. And so this is the kind of problem, and I think it might very well maybe something that you have experience with when you try and have these discussions perhaps in Spanish with people whose English is limited, because it's obviously easy to do what you need to do to get along in the world in a second language, but it's a whole other thing to understand things about why all men are created equal, things about inalienable rights, things about limited government. And so I suspect that this is an issue for you folks, and I expect that hopefully what we're trying to do is provide a tool to take care of these kinds of things. Now, the founding generation of Americans, the guys that were involved in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence, had a commonality of understanding. The understandings are expressed in two ways in the documents. One certainly is in the words, and another one is in the forms. While the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are often praised for their eloquence and for their aspirational philosophies, at heart they are in fact legal documents, both of which were drafted by lawyers. 25 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were attorneys. 22 of the 40 signers of the Constitution were lawyers. The rest were either businessmen or active in public life. And as a result of that, they had a common understanding of a variety of things that we don't necessarily share. And there's two keys to understanding the founding documents as they were understood in the 18th century. One is the language. We have to understand 18th century English to understand some of this. The other one is not quite so self-evident, but rather kind of behind the scenes, but it was common understanding of the founders. But can you imagine if these 18th century guys were to look at these various icons? You think they'd have a clue? No, but they'd take time to learn what it is that we're referring to when we look at those kinds of, because they're all fraught with meaning for each one of us without even having words. And there's something special about the documents that do the same thing. One example from the Constitution, more perfect union from the preamble. When we talk about something that's more perfect in the 21st century, what do we mean? Something that's perfect. Somebody tell me what they think perfect means. Without fault, can't be improved upon. It's the best it can possibly be. In the 18th century, they were relying upon the Latin term that it was derived from, perficere. The Latin term that it was derived from meant to complete. And so when Gouverneur Morris, and we're going to talk about Gouverneur Morris before this is over, when he wrote in the preamble, in order to form a more perfect union, what he was referring to was to have a union that was more complete than the Articles of Confederation. Now, to understand the documents, that you need to take the time to understand things like, what do they mean by general welfare? What do they mean by commerce? Those kinds of things meant something different than they've come to mean today, and what they've come to mean today has often been changed by the folks that have a particular agenda to attach meanings to words. But again, going back to something being law, it needs to be read in the sense that the people that wrote it meant. So we have to go back to the founders and the words and the understanding of things that are self-evident. But we'll go back to the situation about the lawyers in the first place. There was a commonality of understanding because of the commonality of experience in certain ways. And good lawyers do a couple of things. They imitate and improvise. They really just sort of, there's a form for everything. There's a form for wills. There's a form for real estate deeds. There's a form for subpoenas, et cetera, et cetera. And as it turns out, All these items are collected into form books, and the form books are organized according to topic area. And lawyers in the 18th century had the same thing that we have now, although they're easier to access now because we've got CDs and in the cloud and those kinds of ways to access this information. But we continue to imitate and improvise. We've done the same thing. There's two lawyers that were primarily responsible for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. One's pretty well known, Thomas Jefferson. Became a lawyer at 24. He wrote the Constitution. He wrote the Declaration of Independence at 33. The other one is less well known. A fellow by the name of Gouverneur Morris, which was his name, not his title. And Gouverneur Morris graduated Columbia University. Well, he graduated what's now Columbia University, when he was 16 years old, and he became a lawyer at 19. And he wrote the Constitution, ultimately, at 35. And he's hardly known, although he penned probably the most famous phrase in American history. Now, I felt a little bit of a kinship to the Founding Fathers in certain ways, but one way I didn't feel a kinship was I felt like a bit of an underachiever. Jefferson, lawyer at 24, wrote the Declaration at 33. Morris was a lawyer at 19. Me, on the bright side, I delivered my first case of beer when I was 5 years old. And I also learned how to drive a beer truck before I learned how to drive a car. So I had a different kind of kinship, but I did feel like a bit of an underachiever because he was 24, wrote the Declaration 33. I didn't get to be a lawyer until I was 35. And in fact, I probably, even at this late stage in my life, I was a beer guy longer than I've been a lawyer. And that may explain why I try and make things a little more simple than most lawyers do, because I kind of try and do it like I'm sort of talking over a beer. And speaking of talking over a beer, another reason I feel some sort of kinship to these guys is they did a lot of their business at a place called City Tavern in Philadelphia. And last year I was lucky enough to go to City Tavern. I had a Jefferson 1774 Tavern Ale, brewed to Tom's recipe. And it made me have a bit more kinship than I otherwise might have. Now, in bars, very popular to play quiz games and have trivia contests, right? Everybody got a piece of paper, something to write on? I'm going to ask you a question. Ask you to fill it out. No smartphones to answer this, because I will have some awards at the end of this presentation for this. And it's a question that only 1 in 1,000 Americans are capable of answering, although you would think everybody should be able to. Has everybody got their phones away? Yeah, all right, no phones. All right, hands up, no phones, right. Hands up, no phones. What are the 5 rights found in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution? Pardon me? Write it down. Write it down, because we're going to collect them, and we're going to collect them in a little while, and then I've got something for everybody. So take your time. We're not going to run the Jeopardy music, and then we'll collect them, and then we'll write them. We'll give the answers, and we'll see how it does. I was astounded. I do that normally when I do some of these, and last week I did a talk at the Heritage Heartland Institute, and 3 people got it right. It was incredible. On the other hand, that's the first time anybody's got it right in all the times I do this. So, it's common to say the Constitution created a limited government with enumerated powers. Now the real question is, and I don't know who put I have no idea where the line comes from. Okay, it's common to say that the Constitution creates a government of limited creates a limited government of enumerated powers, but the Constitution actually, let's see if we go back a little bit. We had a little bit of, I need to back up just a second. Oh my goodness. We are having some difficulties here. Back again, back again, back again. Ah, there we go. All right. Terms limited government. You guys are talking about limited government here, right? Did you see, you've been talking about it all week, correct? You find that in the Constitution at all? Nah. You find the term enumerated powers in the Constitution at all? No, it's not there. Well, the founders understood the Constitution to contain these concepts because of the form that it was in. And when I talk a little bit about the form, maybe this will give you a different way to perhaps explain those kind of things. I know part of your training is to explain different concepts that are important, and one of them obviously is limited government. They're not in the Constitution. On May 25th, 1787, the Constitutional Convention convened. September the 8th, they finished their work, but what work they had was 23 articles and a whole bunch of sticky notes, right? And they were all kind of pushed together in a pile, given to something called the Committee on Style. The Committee on Style, despite the fact there were 5 guys, ultimately there was one guy that got the assignment to ultimately write the Constitution, a fellow by the name of Gouverneur Morris. He pulled out his form book and in 4 days took the 23 articles and amendments. He distilled it into the 7 articles we know as that make up the original Constitution. And how did he do it? Well, he did it by pulling out the form in his form book called the Power of Attorney. Now, what is a power of attorney? In the 18th century, most people, a lot of folks were very, very familiar with this because a power of attorney allows one person, known as the principal, assign specific duties and specific powers to another called his agent. The agent is confined to only do those things that are in the powers that are listed in the power of attorney. They've got a special duty. They can only do specific things about specific subjects. And it creates a distinct relationship between a principal and agent. And of the lawyers that were involved, obviously each and every one of them understood what a power of attorney was, but also of the business people that were involved in drafting the Constitution understood a power of attorney, because in the 18th century, if you left your business to go, say, on a buying trip to Europe or even someplace around the country, they didn't have any way to communicate. And so they had to appoint agents to run their business. So each and every one of them understood this so well. And when Morris put together the Constitution, he organized it in a way that took advantage of the fact that these things needn't be stated, because over hundreds and hundreds of years, understanding of what a power of attorney was shared by all the people that were there. It was so shared that they didn't have to write down limited government or enumerated powers, because that's what a power of attorney is. If you take the Constitution and lay it side by side with the power of attorney that most people understand in the 21st century, because we don't use them for very many things these days as they used them in the 18th century, but most people are familiar with power of attorney for health care. If you lay the Constitution and power of attorney for health care side by side, you get the same document. You have the parties that are identified in the Constitution. The principal, we the people. The agent, the United States of America. You have the authority granted, Article 1, Section 8, generally speaking, known as the enumerated powers. You also have certain powers granted in Articles 2 and 3. And additionally, you have limitations on that authority. Article 1, Section 9 is sort of known as a mini Bill of Rights that says habeas corpus shall not be suspended. Other kinds of limitations on what the government can do, specific limitations. You find those in a healthcare power of attorney. The limitations on the agent authority is, generally speaking, followed up with defining relationships between the agent and outside third parties, sometimes whether they can communicate with a particular doctor, whether they can communicate with a particular healthcare provider. In the Constitution, you have the Article 4 that defines the relationships of the states with each other and the states with the federal government. And then you also have provisions for altering or amending the power of attorney. That's Article 5 that provides for the amendment process. And generally speaking, there's also provisions for firing, dismissing, appointing alternate successor agents. You can find that in Amendments 9 and 10. You can find that in Amendments 9 and 10, in which case the power of attorney that people understand for healthcare, you lay it side by side with the Constitution, and you have the same document. And generally speaking, so if you're talking with people that don't understand the idea of why the Constitution creates a limited government, because somebody who said, it doesn't say so anyplace, the guys that wrote the Constitution, voted on the Constitution, debated the Constitution, understood that all these things were built into it because of the form of the Constitution. You don't even find that there's some references to powers of the government being limited and a few other strange references in the Federalist Papers, but the Federalist Papers don't even say the terms that we're familiar with, limited government and enumerated powers. They didn't have to say them because they understood them. There was a commonality of understanding. And what does that mean for the Constitution? It means that the United States government is our agent. We're the principal. If you were to execute a power of attorney for healthcare and you told somebody, you gave them what's known as a DNR, a do not resuscitate, or you said, I don't want you to provide a particular kind of therapy, I object to a particular kind of healthcare distribution, you would expect them to follow that. We need to expect no less of our government. In which case, that is why those concepts, why and how those concepts are built into the Constitution. We need to expect no less than what the common understanding was of the framers. Now, final word on Gouverneur Morris. Before today, I'm just curious, he's not one of the real most popular founders, although he did like to hang at City Tavern and he did have a peg leg. Anybody heard of Gouverneur Morris before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not bad. Gouverneur Morris was instrumental in the Committee on Style. There was 5 people on the committee, one of whom was James Madison, who we know as the father of the Constitution, primarily because he kept the best notes and perhaps was a better publicist for himself personally. But James Madison said the form and the structure and the words of the Constitution are rightfully due to the penmanship of Gouverneur Morris. Gouverneur Morris got those 23 articles and all the stuff that those guys had done for 5 months and turned it into the Constitution. But as important as that is, when he got the first draft of the preamble read, "We the people of the states of New York and New Hampshire and Virginia and 10 more ordain and establish." Morris changed that phrase to "We the people of the United States." The incredible, immense meaning of that change is that what the Constitution was creating before Morris changed that was a group of organization of governments, and what he did in the end by changing that to "We the people of the United States" was change it to a nation. Morris is relatively unknown, but his penmanship and his eloquence has survived through the ages. Now, pass your First Amendment answers. And could somebody collect, I need a volunteer to collect some answers. Yes, sir. Would you collect those for me? Yeah, he's going to cheat. Just pass them in, collect. And I'll tell you that, again, only only 1 in 1,000 Americans can name these. Typically, often they'll get religion, speech, press, assembly. Almost nobody gets petition for redress of grievances. And here's why. And it's a cautionary tale in terms of protecting our freedoms. Now, you would think that something that's ranked among the things up there with religion, speech, assembly, press, was pretty important. And it was pretty important to the guys that wrote it. And here's why. During the colonial period and during the early days of the Republic, people had not only a right to send a letter to their congressman or send in these days, an email. It doesn't mean send an email, doesn't mean give them a phone call. It actually meant that when you sent a petition to the legislature had a duty and an obligation to give you a hearing on it. They had to refer it to committee, hold hearings, and give an up or down vote on the ideas that you presented to your legislator. And that's why it was in the First Amendment, because it was that important to people at that time. During the 1840s and 1850s, Congress was inundated with petitions for the abolition of slavery. The Democrats that were in charge of Congress at the time had enough of the petitions for abolishing slavery. They didn't want to hear about it anymore, so they imposed what was called a gag rule. And starting in the 1840s and 1850s, they quit entertaining petitions for redress of grievances. The end result is that fifth right in the First Amendment is something we've lost. It's something we have lost. There's a cautionary tale there that if, in fact, we don't defend those. Have you got the answers? Come on up. Yeah, we're gonna flip through them. There's a cautionary tale there about our rights. That, in fact, if we don't defend them, they'll disappear. And we certainly don't want them to disappear. And that's why nobody can speech, press, religion. No petition. Speech, press, religion, assembly, petition. Here's a winner here. I've got 5 prizes, so we'll continue. Free speech, expression. You know, I almost all the time somebody puts the right to bear arms. Where's the right to bear arms? Second Amendment. What are 5 rights? Religion, press, assembly, speech. That's 4. But it's close, so we'll put that on the side in case we don't get any other. Speech, assembly, press, religion, petition. Speech, assembly, press, conscience, petition. Religion, there's 6 here. 5, it's got 5, but somebody's hedging their bets. Somebody's hedging their bets. We'll see how that works out. Religion, press, speech, press, assembly. That's only 4. Peacefully protest. Nope. Press, assemble, redress of grievances, religion, speech. Oh, well, you know, sometimes religion gets counted twice, one for establishment and one for free exercise. This one includes both free exercise and establishment, so that's a definite winner there. And I've got 1, 2, 3 winners. Speech, assembly, religion, Oh, that's too bad. Speech, assembly, religion, petition, and press is scratched out. Oh, yeah. All right, we'll put that on the side just in case. Press, religion, assembly, speech, and protest. No, protest doesn't fall. Press, religion, assembly, petition, speech. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, we got a chance for one more. Speech, assembly, petition, press, religion. It's a great group. I got five here. And I got Rosa Treviso, okay? And I have Daniel Herrera. All right. Emmanuel Espinoza. Sit down. Emmanuel? Where's Emmanuel? Oh, okay, you have to be present to win. Shayla Cervantes. Very good. And I only have a first name here. Elisa. These are the 5 winners. We're gonna get to that in just a moment. I'll give you what the prizes are, but now those are the answers, and those are our winners. And I should be going to another slide. Okay, you should be handed out, you should have gotten a handout, which has a front and a back. On one side, it has a discount code that gives you 33% off if you're interested in getting constitutional soundbites or capsulas informativas. On the back side, however, one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, and one of the things that Dr. Downey is involved with me with, is not only did we put together the first book, Capsulas Informativas, we also started the first website devoted to the founding documents that's done in Spanish, delosestadosunidos.com. And we've covered quite a bit of material already in De los Estados Unidos, thanks to Dr. Downey's translation work. But for those of you who have interest, we would love to have additional Spanish writers for delosestadosunidos.com. And if you would like to contribute to our website in Spanish, the information, for contact information on that is on the back. And for those of you who think your Spanish skills might not be good enough to write for the website, I will tell you that we'll have both Dr. Arias and Dr. Downey being the proofreaders to make sure that the Spanish is up to snuff and properly done for the purposes of our website. So I would hope that those of you who have an interest in writing about limited government, free markets, other kinds of opinion, current events, if you have an interest in writing about those things in Spanish, we'd love to have you contribute to delosestadosunidos.com. And the information is on the back side of the sheet there. Now this has brought together a pretty special group, and I think it's important to realize that you guys have kind of both a special opportunity and a special responsibility, not just regarding what you've learned about, not just talking to your peers, not just debating your teachers, but you have a special responsibility understanding and communicating with your family, your community, the folks whose Spanish skills are much better than their English skills, and for whom nobody has ever explained, made available in a language they understand the best, the first principles of the United States of America. You have a special, special place. One final word about my grandmother. And of course, they started a beer business, if I didn't mention that before, which is why I delivered beer when I was 5 years old. And oh, by the way, I'm sure some of you may be I've given talks at universities before, and when I talk about the 5 rights in the First Amendment, I've explained that college-age students, whoever this is appropriate for, can pretty much always win and drink for free all night long by challenging anybody else to name the 5 rights in the First Amendment. You know, if you make them a bet, I'll buy you a drink if you can name, and you buy me if you can't, you're going to win, and you're going to drink for free through most of your college career. So you might want to something only a beer guy would think about, you know. I was, like I said, but my grandmother, she was born in September. As I mentioned, she was 8 of her 11 brothers and sisters were killed by communists. She made us celebrate her birthday on the 4th of July, which was the anniversary of her becoming an American citizen. And that was the day she considered herself to have truly been born. Now, we're coming toward the 4th of July very, very soon. And a few years ago, I was talking to a high school group, and I asked people what year the United States started, and somebody said 1700, and then I said, no, it was before that, or after that, and somebody said 1800. Finally, we zeroed in on 1776, and then eventually, I said, you know, what about what day? And nobody could get that until I finally said, well, fireworks and barbecues and hot dogs and things like that, and then people said 4th of July. They didn't understand what the 4th of July was. We need to remember when the 4th of July comes up that it was, in fact, about founding a country that ultimately would be one of limited government, protection of inalienable rights, the principles that make us Americans. Now, regardless of where we come from, whether it's 400 years ago for escaped religious persecution, or whether it was 20th century escaping communism, or for, in other situations, going on an underground railroad to escape slavery, there's a commonality that we all share. And just like the Constitution and power of attorney, if you lay them side by side, you get the same document. If we think about it, if you lay our individual family history side by side, there's somebody like my grandmother in everyone's. In which case, we not only share and are bound by the concepts, we're shared and bound by a commonality of history that's often overlooked. And I think that's important that people should remember when it comes to celebrating the 4th of July. And I hope you will do that as well. And with that, I thank you. If there's a question or two, and the 5 of you who are winners, I want you to come up here as soon as we're done. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have questions?
No? Okay. In that case, I need Elise, and I need Shayla, and I need Emmanuel, and I need Daniel Herrera. Yes. What is your opinion on Donald Trump? It's a popular question. I heard that question of the previous speaker. I will tell you that in a couple of ways. I heard Congressman or former Speaker Gingrich talk about Donald Trump, and I liked what the speaker had to say about that. And he said that he knows Mr. Trump, and that Mr. Trump, were he to become president of the United States, would wake up each and every morning, and the first question that he would ask himself is, what can I do that's right for America today? I do believe that for all, and here's something else, I don't know. You guys, I I don't know, you're a little young, but you've probably seen it on repeats and on in cable TV. You familiar with Friends? Yeah. You familiar with Seinfeld? You enjoy those shows, right? Trump talks like those people from New York. Okay, you know, he talks like those people from New York. I kind of take some of what goes on with a grain of salt, and I think back to how popular and how much everybody enjoyed these unfiltered, loudmouthed kind of folks that we would see on Friends and see on Seinfeld. And I just get the sense that he talks like those people, and that we're not. And so we find those things entertaining, but those are probably what the people are like in real life. And so he may talk differently than the rest of us, but I actually do think he would wake up as president and say, what can I do today that's right for America? And that's my belief about Mr. Trump. So, yes. Okay, one second. Come on. You can't do it? Okay, well. Oh, yeah, well then come on up. Oh, here. How did you, are we on here? Hello? Come on up. I understand that there's a story behind how folks wound up knowing all of this. Go ahead. Explain how you knew the answers.
About 5 months ago, I decided to look into the Constitution and figure out what were some of the most important amendments, and I found out that the First, Second, and Fifth Amendment, along with the preamble, was the most important things to know. So I went back and I memorized the First, Second, and Fifth Amendment along with the preamble.
Fantastic. And each of you are going to get, side by side, one of the English copies, and I got them backwards, right? One of the Spanish copies and one of the English copies. And strangely enough, we actually did the Spanish first, which is why the first president is on the cover of the Spanish book. We needed to make them a little bit different, and inside the book you'll find out it grew out of the radio show, and that's why these guys have headphones on them. Okay, and so, but you'll get one English, one Spanish. They track each other, and so congratulations. Yeah, they should have a round of applause. Absolutely.